Okay. Now I can't hear. Now I can only hear. Now I can't hear you through the video. I can only hear you.
All right, I had,
Oh, now I
yeah,
can hear you. I can hear you now. But I can't do anything about the video.
yeah.
And now
And
it's
now it's recorded.
Is there a motion to open the meeting?
I make a motion to open the meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the motion? All in favor signify, please. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The meeting is convened. Good evening. Welcome to the April 1st, 2021 meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee for Revision of the Mamaroneck Code of Ethics. The first item on the agenda is actually not one you have. Nora has a conflict next week and cannot attend a 6:30 meeting. So we must either meet on another night or preferably meet earlier, because I cannot meet on Tuesday night and I cannot meet on Wednesday night. Is it possible for the members to attend the meeting next Thursday at 5:00 p.m.?
It works for me.
Works for me.
Yeah, I guess that's all right.
You're critical, Brian.
I am.
You are important, yeah. All right, if you can make it, then we'll make the meeting. Thank you all for at 5:00 p.m.
I'm gonna send. I'll send Sally a note right now.
Nora, I can't hear you.
Really?
Yeah, you're very faint.
Is that better?
Slightly, very slightly.
Okay. I don't know why. I will send. Is that better?
Yes.
I'll send Sally a note right now so we don't forget.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
And just while you're on the subject of meetings, God, I have to do math. I'm going away Friday, August 16th. So whatever that next Thursday is.
You mean April 16th?
Yes, that one too. Thank you. So I guess it's the 23rd or 22nd.
22nd.
Thank you. I don't have a calendar in front of me. The 22nd, I will not be here.
Okay, just give us a, a reminder
Sure.
as we get closer to the date.
Okay.
Okay. Nora, could you just advise on the status of the mailing of the notice to employees?
Yeah, we sent Sherry a reminder last week, but he was on vacation, so he should be back Monday. So we will check with him again on Monday, because it's going to come out of his. It's going to come from his office.
Okay.
So hopefully Tuesday.
Okay. You don't have video for Mike yet, huh?
Well, yeah, he's co-host. He just has to put it on himself.
Oh, can you?
I'm trying to bring the video up. So it's not doing it. I don't have access to that. But I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So the next item on the agenda was going to be the continued discussion on the subject of who responds when there's an ethics question, but I want to insert one other subject which we can discuss now or we can hold for afterwards. And that has to do with and it's kind of a point of inquiry for me too. It came up last week in the meeting with Bob Spolzino, and that is the designation of persons required to file disclosure statements. I don't think the code provides categories, but I take it that there is prepared at some point a list of who the actual people are who have to file disclosure statements. And what I could infer from the discussion to date is that that's not a very precise date, and it may have something to do with the inefficiency in filing disclosure statements. Am I right on that? And should we be putting in the code a date by which those people who must file statements should be identified?
I
I
thought
mean-
we had that. I thought in the code, we already have that by whatever date in January, the Board of Trustees has to finalize the list.
I thought what we were doing was let me take a look at that.
And also, I
would-
forget which code of ethics I was looking at from the other municipalities, but some list the positions. I think it was Mount Vernon I was looking at in particular. They list people required to file by position in their code of ethics. And also, I don't think we ever approved the minutes of last meeting.
You're quite right. Let's take a break and do that. That was the first item, which I skipped over. Yeah, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of March 25, 2021 as edited?
I make a motion.
Second? I
Second.
second. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please signify. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion is carried. The minutes are approved. Thank you for that, Brian.
Actually, Dan, before we get, I think where you're headed is going to start with lengthy conversations. So can I add one more quick thing to the agenda?
Yeah.
So we invited the mayor to come speak with us. Is there any reason why we have not invited the 4 trustees? Because I think we would get valuable input from them as well. And, Nora, as much as she's on the call, she's only responding to specific questions we're asking her.
I think that's a
So-
great idea, and Dan, if I can jump in, that was probably a mistake of ours not to invite them to come in also. And I just extend that a little bit further. Should we have any discussion about inviting or personalizing the request to participate to any other mayors or trustees, right? So that, we're getting their perspective firsthand. And it doesn't have to be a lengthy conversation, but at a minimum, I agree with Ellen. I think we should invite the current board and then ask anybody else.
And what really got me there was the fact that Victor's joining us every week and he never raises his hand. So I'd love to hear his input as well as the other 3 trustees. But Victor's been listening to our discussions and the recommendations we're making. I have no idea if he's sitting at home twitching as we're saying things, but I think it would be very valuable to have the input from the trustees.
Good point.
I make a motion, Dan, if I can, that we just, follow Ellen's recommendation there and just send an email directly to them.
All right. So what is the language of the motion?
If, we're interested in hearing their opinions and views
All
on,
right, but you move to invite,
invite the current Board of Trustees
okay,
to participate in this discussion if they want. I don't know, but I agree with Ellen. We did invite the mayor, and I understand the mayor has a role here in this process, but we do have 4 other elected officials who are currently here, and I don't see a reason why we wouldn't just extend it to them. And I know that they can jump on at any point that they want to.
okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion on the motion? I will just say that if there is any group that is more than well informed about the existence of the ad hoc committee and our keen interest in having everyone participate, it is the Board of Trustees. They were up to now well aware that they could approach us, take part, offer suggestions and comments. Notwithstanding that, I support the motion.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just the only thing I support it too, because I think anyone should be able to come to our meetings and give a comment. I'm just concerned. It's like we're gonna put this to the Board of Trustees anyway. So like, I just like anyone could have the right to come to our meetings, but I just don't see the value of like having a trustee come when they're going to be voting on this anyway.
I think the
Well, I-
benefit, Brian, since I suggested it, is they may have suggestions that we've missed.
And just following up on Ellen says, you know, I did not know that Victor was on here, and I'm surprised that he was not participating in the discussion. And I wonder if, you know, maybe they want to be invited to this so as they don't feel as if they're driving the discussion of this committee that they formed. And that if the committee seeks their input and we send a, you know, affirmative request saying, look, we're interested in hearing what you have to say, that might provide them a little more incentive to come forward. I don't know. I'm surprised that Victor's on and he hasn't said anything.
Victor, if you are on, we invite you now and in the future to raise your hand and even offer your view on whether you would like to formally take part in this. But, and I mean it, everyone is welcome. I've said many times, we're working in a fishbowl. Everything we write, everything we email is a matter of public record. We want this to be participatory.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I see the value in like a trustee coming. I don't know, maybe it's like the thing, it's like, then why'd they create this committee if they could have just done this themselves? That's kind of my opinion.
No, but Brian, not to.
And I feel, sorry, and I feel like that with a lot of things like traffic. It's like, why'd you create a committee if you weren't gonna do it anyway? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but Brian, I think we're all looking at the code in one way, and we don't have the same role that the trustees have. So they may have a different view. That's worth a discussion. You know, I just think it helps us create a better document to ultimately put in front of the trustees.
All right.
You know, that's Nora. Even though, you know, you're here quietly, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, you know, I think Tom wanted to come, and so he came. You know, I mean, I put my initial comments in beforehand. You know, we all were asked to send in some notes, which I did. I mean, I'm happy to come. You know, I've been watching, I've been paying attention. But the reason, I mean, really, the reason this committee was formed, because I don't think that is the Board of Trustees didn't have the bandwidth to do this kind of detailed review. So I just want to say personally, I'm thankful. And, you know, I'm happy to, you know, I'm just trying, I try to only comment when you ask me, so I'm not trying to drive the conversation, so.
And you're good about only commenting when we ask you, but you may have other thoughts that we've missed.
Well, and I agree with Ellen 100%. And I think Nora's saying she only comments when asked. And I think we should afford the sitting board the opportunity to come forward and just say we're interested. I don't think, if they don't want to come, they don't want to come. They don't, that's okay. But I just think it's a simple request. Hey, we'd love to hear your comments.
Yeah, I agree.
Your discussion on this motion?
Well, Victor hasn't raised his hand yet, but.
Oh, he did actually.
Oh, he did? Hold on. Victor, I'm gonna.
Ah, his hand's raised.
Okay. Now. Okay, now, Victor, I have to make you a co-host so you can talk. Okay? And then you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I've been just listening to learn, to follow your discussion, the detailed review, which when I had the opportunity, I do join because, going section by section, trying to be as comprehensive as you are has been very valuable to me. I will think about a few areas where I think I can contribute to the input that you may want before we get something from you. I think that would be my approach, because I do agree. I don't know who mentioned it, that it's really you're conducting the discussion. At some point it'll come to us, but It's I'm actually not thinking that way. I'm just learning more and looking at it from different angles than just being kind of the decision maker or what I should do at this point. So I think if I identify a few areas, I will definitely send an email and join you at some point. So thank you for considering that. I see value for that, but you're making the call at this point.
Thank you for that, Victor.
Right.
Is there any further discussion on this motion? If not, all please signify by voice or hand. Aye.
I,
All right.
The motion is carried. So if you look at the paragraph I have on the screen now, this frames my issue. Initial and annual disclosure. Every designated officer, board member, and employee is required to file an initial disclosure form. Who determines what a designated officer, board member, or employee is?
the there's a different section. Let me pull out the Racy matrix because that identifies what section the Board of Trustees has to identify. So hang on one sec.
I'm sorry, could you just read the section you're at? Just so I have it for can you scroll up a little?
This is 21.5B.
Okay, thank you.
So Dan, in section 21-6, that's the designation of who has to do the disclosure statements. So maybe this is in backwards order. We're saying somebody has to do something
Within
before we
90
identify
days.
them.
The board shall notify all within 90 days after the effective date and during the month of January, the board shall cause to be filed with the ethics board the list. So since we're
And we're also saying in point B, all those who have the who will be notified by January 15th of each year.
So does during the month of January partially conflict with the filing of or the notice by January 15th? Are we saying two different things? Are we saying during the month of January and January 15th?
Well, we probably need to tighten up the wording, but I think we're saying by January 15th of every year, the board needs to finalize the who, so they can notify the who. And then we're saying by whenever in February, the previous section you had, they need to file. But as we discussed in a previous call, when I think John was saying this should all be done at the annual organization meeting, the positions can be identified at any time during the year.
What should be done at the annual organization meeting?
So if the annual organization meeting, if we're appointing someone new to a land board or a zoning board, it's that position now has a name. And I think that's where John was coming from. But the position and the functions themselves that are nameless, no individuals, can be done at any time during the year.
Why wouldn't we spell out every single position at this point and then
Exactly.
say, this is the beginning, and that this list is to be reviewed by the board and any additions to be made within a certain time frame, then it would become effective. So, and I think, we take whatever board we call board position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and move like that, and then that's established, and then any other additional positions as the board sees fit. And then we give those people a 45-day period after the board notifies them, or whatever time frame we want.
And I think it was also Village Clerk Fusco who suggested it be done at the annual meeting just because it's like a regular interval of confirming the list of positions.
Okay.
Well,
so
the annual board meeting puts names to the positions. The positions exist.
Yeah, but I mean the ones who are required to file.
Yep,
Well-
I'm just saying it puts the name to it at the annual meeting.
All right, now I'm even more confused. Let me start with this. What is the annual meeting?
The December meeting, once the trustees are sworn in office.
I can answer that. Brian's got it. It's the organizational meeting really, and it's the first Monday in December, and it's when the new board members are sworn in, and committee appointments are made. So it's really just a process meeting. There's never, the business is only structural. Appointing the prosecutor, the village attorney, clerk treasurer, that kind of thing.
But it's also any new committee members and
Yeah.
any new members of anything.
So that's when we appoint, because vacancies, terms run from December 3rd till December 3rd, let's say, right? So we appoint new people to boards and commissions, and that's when they would be subject to disclosure if they're on that list.
That, Nora, is that a date that, with everything going on, that makes sense for such a list of people to disclose? Is that a date when they should be identified?
So that was a recommendation I think that Bob Spolzino made last time, and I think he's right. It's the only meeting where there's an actual structure. Like, there's a script that happens. It's virtually the same every year. But I would say that it would be fine. I think there might be a new board member who might think somebody else should be included subsequent to that. But I think that would be the logical time to adopt that and to put that in part of it so that that's in the minutes. I actually can't find the list right now. I've been looking to see if I can find a copy of the list. I don't have the list of who has to file a disclosure report.
So
I have it somewhere. Sally sent it to us months ago.
So we're talking about taking this within 90 days and during the month must be filed. So we're actually now saying that the Board of Trustees shall cause to be filed with the village the list of names and offices or positions that should be done in December.
Yeah, I think if it's incorporated into the annual meeting, then at least it will be reviewed every year in advance of the annual meeting. So I think, it's not the annual meeting, it's the organizational meeting, but I think it's the annual organizational meeting.
Is that
And
the
now let's,
form-
go ahead, Dan.
that-
Go ahead, Dan.
is that the formal name of the meeting?
It's the AOM, Annual Organization Meeting.
And is that in like a statute that we can refer to it and people will know what it is?
I don't know that it's in a statute. It's just the way. It's when the new trustees or new mayor is sworn in.
They're not sworn
So
in
I
every
never-
year though, are they?
What?
Are they sworn in every year?
Well, you're sworn in every year you're elected. So every year there is someone sworn in because we have elections every year. So in
Yeah.
even years it's 3 trustees, and in odd years it's the mayor and 1 trustee. So every year on the first Monday of December, 2 or 3 people are sworn in.
So is there a formal date then? Is it the first Monday in December?
Yeah.
All right, I'm just getting this so I know how to write it into the statute. All right, so what I'm hearing, and we can of course have more discussion on this, is that we are now taking this January date and we're moving it back to December. And I think we heard that the village clerk favors this and the village attorney favors this, as well as Nora has just weighed in.
I think it's practical. I mean, somebody might have a better idea, but it's certainly worth recommending.
Okay,
Makes sense to me.
good.
I also think, sorry, I think the process is the suggested process that they make the list in December and the village clerk notifies those people by January 15th of each year. And then those people have to file their disclosure statements by, I think, February 15th.
Exactly. I think this list is going to stay the same. 99% of the people are going to, or positions are going to be on this the same. And it's just a matter of who is seated in those positions. There might come a time each year that somebody's got to review based on a committee that's set up like ours, that there might need to be an addition to it. But for the most part, all of these seats, for lack of a better term, are going to be established. And I think at the organizational meeting, that's the perfect time.
Okay. All right, I don't think we have to vote on it because I don't hear any opposition.
Correct.
So I'll just redraft this section accordingly.
But I'm wondering in terms of order of this document,
It's
Do
a
we
little out of
do the-
order.
do we do the designation of the who before what the who has to do?
Yeah, I think we need to reverse the sections.
Yeah, so do I. And you know,
Okay,
my favorite thing, that will be much easier than to do a process map.
okay. Anything else on this? I'm glad I brought it up because it sort of removed removed the confusion I had. So thank you for
And
that.
just one thing while we're on procedure here, and we may have just discussed it, but should the procedure be for the board to formally vote or take some other official action to say, yes, these are the positions that continue to require to file at that annual meeting? Like, we're putting them there. I don't know. I put it out there. I hate to leave something out and somebody says no.
That's up to the board as to how they certify or identify. Either, I don't think we can tell them how to prepare the list.
Do we just put it right in the changes here that these are the seats then, and then once it's adopted by the board or subsequent boards as the law of the village, then that should establish it. I just
Right.
wanted to be clear that every one of these positions are officially recognized as having to engage in this process. Maybe by virtue of putting it in this document, it should cover that then.
Right, so Mike, following that, I don't know that we're saying necessarily that the list of positions gets approved at the organizational meeting. I think that list of the who should be before the organizational meeting. So when there are new individuals in those seats, they can then be notified either at that organizational meeting or right after.
Well, I think that would be the whole point of the January 15th date, is to notify. I think the annual disclosure just to confirm like the who, no matter if it changes or not. And then
Right, so the who, I'm sorry, Brian, the who's identified at the organizational meeting if there are any changes. So we're saying, so that meeting's the first Monday in December.
Mhm.
So we're then waiting a month and a half to notify them?
I mean, I thought also the village clerk's office said they're like busy in December.
Yep,
I don't
they
know,
did.
taxes or
Yep,
other things. And also like the holidays. Like the end of December is like.
I'd
not
also add that
normal.
right after the annual organizational meeting, then the individuals who've been appointed have to be sent notes that they've been appointed, and then they have to send in their oath of office.
Yeah.
So I don't,
So then maybe the January 15th notification makes sense.
I think it does.
But I think the date that the Board of Trustees approves the who is before that.
Well, I think, haven't we made it at the annual organizational meeting?
Yep,
So we'll leave that as is.
okay.
Mike, have we gone off your track, or are we still covering your subject?
No, we're good. I'm good.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you all for that. Now let's go to this continued discussion on what person or entity responds to persons seeking answers, advice, or guidance
Mhm.
on the code of ethics. I sent this, what I thought was a summary memo of our discussion last week. And I set forth what I thought to be the different points of view of whether you go to the village attorney or whether you go to the ethics board for your question. So I'll put the first question I'll put out to you is, should we be promulgating a policy on channeling ethics questions if a contractor, a citizen, a committee member, a consultant has a question on ethics and they need an answer quickly, need an answer in less than 3 weeks? Is there a process by which we can define that? Should we be defining a process?
I think we have already with the whole like written advisor opinions. Like, I don't know why we're like deviating from that.
All right, so Nora raised something very interesting at the last meeting, which was that if the Board of Ethics only meets once a month, that's the only time they can respond. So, and we've previously said everything needs to be documented and it can't be a one-person answer.
I mean, I was looking on the village calendar today. They seem to be meeting like every 2 weeks, actually. They have like special meetings all the time, the Board of Ethics all the time, especially now. It's all virtual. You don't have to meet in person anymore. So I think any concern of that is, I don't think it has merit.
That's fine if that continues to happen going forward.
I mean, it's just like the nature of, I guess, being on the Board of Ethics is you have a lot of meetings.
Well, I think that that's only recent. They're scheduled to meet once a month by code. And I think the reality is you can't expect them, you can't, I think that if it's, you're talking about a land use board, for instance, if they get their packet, a week before a meeting, there isn't necessarily going to be enough time to get that ethics opinion, advisory opinion.
Unless they do a special meeting, no?
Well, you have to have 3 days to schedule a special meeting. So you'd have to have a quorum of the ethics board and you'd have to have enough time for the village to schedule the meeting. So I'm not sure if that's really practical.
I mean,
So
And-
what about the thought of, so we have 5 members on the ethics board. What if we do a rotation saying that as long as there's a meeting of 3 members, so it's not as onerous on all 5. And to Brian's point, those rotating 3 can meet every other week or on demand as needed.
Well, I mean, that's, you might limit people who want to be on the ethics board if they are required to meet every 2 weeks. I mean, and again, these meetings have to be scheduled and properly noticed.
Can I just jump in here? There's 2 things. The first thing for me, I'm still not clear who is subordinate to who. Who has the final authority to sign off on something that the village then is going to say, okay, yes, we agree with that. And then second, this emergency stuff, I get it. We want to be flexible here, but people should be aware of these rules and regulations ahead of time. And, I don't expect there's going to be too many emergencies. And whoever that first point of contact is, if they feel this is like there's a sense of urgency, maybe they should reach out to the other person, whether it's the attorney or the board, depending on who gets the first notification. But I think the first thing is we have to determine who is going to be responsible for making that decision. Who is the person that the village is entrusting with and saying, yes, this is the official position of the Village of Mamaroneck? Is it the attorney or is it the board?
Well, do you mean that somebody, if there is a board member of any board that's asking about whether or not they need to recuse, that there's somebody who can determine yes they have to or no they don't have to?
At the end of the day, somebody has to be accountable.
Well,
And
the
is
only
that person the
that's
village
accountable is-
attorney?
The recusal is a very personal decision, so the person who's accountable, you can get advice, but it's up to the person recusing or not recusing.
But if that person seeks guidance from the ethics group, without saying board or attorney, from the responsible party, who is that responsible party? Is that the attorney who has the final sign off? And then that board member can say, I spoke with the board, a member of the board, the committee, or the attorney. Who is that person that then has the ability to say, you're clear, you can go?
I don't think anybody. From the training I've had, you can seek advice, but you have to make your own decision and be responsible for that decision.
Somebody
so-
at some point, no, I disagree, Nora. At some point, the Village of Mamaroneck is going to provide a legal opinion to a board member or an employee and say, yes, this is acceptable conduct that is consistent with our policy. We will stand behind you.
And to add on to that, Mike, so we've already discussed that all requests to the Board of Ethics be fully documented. We haven't discussed that about the village attorney. So if you could go either place, which I don't agree with, we need to make sure that's all properly documented as well.
I think there are pros and cons to each side to going with one versus the other. My
Yep.
concern at this point is that we don't know which one is the final sign off. And that's, I think, very important. I think that if I went to somebody for sign off, I'd want to know that the person I obtained that approval from is the legitimate person to grant me that approval.
Yep.
I think there are so many shades of gray here. Someone could have a very answerable question and get a very common sense and black letter law answer by going to the village attorney, who might say, read here, here's the answer, read, it's right in the code, section 21-5A. And I feel the village attorney, who was a lawyer, I don't mean Spalzino specifically, but whoever is the village attorney is a lawyer, knowledgeable presumably of the code, and should be able to say, just check this section, rather than, no, I'm not supposed to be giving you advice. Then the very great questions are the ones involving perhaps a recusal issue, in which someone may want some guidance. And here, the village attorney can say, well, how you have what you've described to me is not something I can give you guidance on. I can give you a non-binding opinion because I am the village attorney, but you cannot rely upon it. For that, you must go to the Board of Ethics. I just feel that we should not be handcuffing the village attorney and prohibiting the village attorney from offering guidance or an opinion with the clear proviso that the attorney must make a record of the inquiry and inform the caller, this is not, I am not giving you permission. I am not giving you I am not authorizing action of any kind.
Right, because didn't Bob say last week, unless I misunderstood him, that his opinions aren't necessarily binding because he represents the village, not the individuals.
Right. And what
Dan-
my concern was that he was giving them out and he didn't have a record of them.
Well, it's two concerns. Even if he did have a record, from what he said, it really didn't matter.
And Dan, I'm
Yes.
okay with the village attorney providing this day-to-day guidance, but then it's got to be clear to the person receiving the guidance, that is not the position of the Board of Ethics. And two, that person, we should put this into the process that the village attorney is required to notify the Board of Ethics that this is the decision that individual has made, and that they can either agree or disagree with that opinion. But right now, if somebody goes to the village attorney, and this is what we want them seeking guidance. But they need to know that if they go to that person and that person gives them an opinion, that is the rule of the village. And right now, that's not the case.
I think and I appreciate that what goes on in private industry isn't necessarily the case with government roles. But I know whether I was at JP Morgan Chase, Standard & Poor's, NatWest Markets, whether it's for ethics, for anything where you needed an opinion on, we were explicitly told who you go to. If you have a question on ABC, this is what you need to do. And that's lacking here. We need to make sure all of our employees, board members, consultants, whoever knows who they should be going to get an opinion, and that it's binding. If you go to the village attorney, it's not necessarily binding, even though it may be documented and shared with the Board of Ethics. That's not necessarily the role of the village attorney. And I think that's part of what's up to the Board of Trustees to determine what the role of the village attorney is, particularly in regards to this.
Ellen, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm sorry, Dan. Ellen, the key word here is binding. What is binding, and what can our land, or I don't want to say land use, I think that's wrong. What can our volunteers and or our employees go to the bank with? What is the position of the village? And it should be binding to protect them. They've come to seek input and advice, and that advice should be the position of the village. And right now, I don't know who it is. And so I would propose that there is a mechanism that if either or could be an individual ethics committee member gets a request, that it is put out to the board as a group, and that the village attorney is involved, and the village attorney is approached for advice, that the attorney is directed to put this to the board. And the attorney can say, look, this is what I think. Should it be in an emergency situation, which again is probably not often, then the board can either decide, let's act quickly, let's call a meeting as quickly as we can, or direct the individual, look, we cannot provide you the appropriate direction now, you're on your own. And I hate to put it like that, but in essence, that's what they are. And they could be subject to sanction.
Yeah, I agree.
As Ellen points out, in a private company, the employee code of conduct instructs employees that if they have a question, they go to, if not their supervisor, they go to the either a compliance officer or the office of legal office or the office of compliance. So they get a binding instruction. So I think it's right. We can't leave people in the lurch. They need direction one way or the other. Now the question is where they get the direction. Do they get it from the village attorney who says, this is the opinion, I am the lawyer for this government corporation, and this is the opinion of the government corporation? Or do they go to the Board of Ethics and the Board of Ethics makes a ruling?
My personal opinion is they go to the Board of Ethics because unless I misunderstood what Bob said last week, he does not represent individual employees. He represents the village as an entity. So he could say something, I could go with a question and he could say something to me and there's a big issue and what he said to me is wrong. From a village entity perspective. So I think we need to be very clear, and I believe it's Mike who has said this in the past. So Mike, if I'm misquoting you, jump in. Our goal here should really be to make it very clear on how the employees, or whoever the whole who is, VOBEC, how they comply. We don't want anyone to not be in compliance. So we need to make it very clear. How do you get in compliance? It can't be an either or. I don't know. I think it needs to go to the Board of Ethics. And if they have a question, they can reach out to the village attorney to get their legal opinion from a village entity perspective.
Can I just offer one thing? I'm 100% with you, and I don't want either or. And I wish John were here because, he brings this up, but we want somebody to have a working relationship with the volunteers and the employees. I think it's important that there is a process that working relationship transmits up to the Board of Ethics for the final approval if that's what we want. Otherwise, the attorney can give the final sign off and we just write that here into the new code and say, this is what we think is best. I don't want to leave it that they can only go once a month to the Board of Ethics. And I think that's a lot what John said, is that he wants working relationship. Because we've got to put in the process the notifications following the working relationship. And it might be a simple question that the attorney can handle, but I don't think he should be the final sign off. And I think that the village attorney himself has said he's not the final sign off. He can't be.
Yeah, and I would just add that, like, say there's a hypothetical situation of someone going to the Board of Ethics, which they should, in my opinion. I don't think they should go to the village attorney every time. But if they go to the Board of Ethics and the Board of Ethics gives an opinion, the person follows the opinion, then the Board of Ethics is like, oh, we messed up. That was actually an ethical violation. It's like at least they can be held accountable for giving the wrong information. I feel like the village attorney could just throw their hands up and be like, oh, it's not binding. I think, like, I just think like someone should go to the Board of Ethics. Like, what's the whole point of having an opinion, an advisory opinion, and keeping records of that?
And there'd also be an audit trail to that point, Brian.
Yeah, and I agree, like the village attorney represents the entire village and not like individual employees, even if they do have a problem in their individual capacity. Or in their official capacity, I should say, sorry. But I just think the Board of Trustees should be tasked with giving opinions.
Okay. I think I'm getting a sense of what the committee is thinking.
I mean, I know Mr. Hofstadter disagrees, and I don't know about Ms. Donat.
I agree with you. John definitely thought the village attorney should be the first stop. And not to introduce something new into this discussion, and I don't know if it matters, but the village is considering hiring an in-house village attorney. And I don't know what the board will be determining their roles and responsibilities are. And I think that has a bearing on all of this as well.
Ellen, it may, but those roles and responsibilities can change depending on the board, as can the
Absolutely.
fact that we have an in-house attorney. So I again think it's best for us just to establish what we think is the best course of action as it pertains to the ethics rules.
Yep,
And then the board can either adopt it or not.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
I believe I am recognizing an emerging consensus, and that favors the Board of Ethics as the arbiter of these questions. So I will look at the code. I'm thinking out loud, trying to conjure a way to frame the code in such a way as to say that the village attorney, that no opinion issued by the village attorney relating to the code of ethics shall be binding upon the village.
Or for individuals.
It's in effect, it's binding the village.
So one of the things, and I know I've harped on this from day one, so I apologize, but I think we need to have an appendix to the code with overall processes. And this to me is a process. Who do you go to? And that should be part of the annual training. So whether they use the conflicts of interest training New York State offers, we need to add to that training what the process is for employees who have questions.
Well, I think that's right. I think that goes along with educating employees on what the code is.
Yep. What do
So-
you do if you have a question?
Yeah, inevitably there are going to be hybrid questions which are in part relate to non-ethical issues, but in part relate to ethical issues. And the village attorney is going to be somewhat stymied at that point. But as I said, I've got to think through how to word this so that our consensus is articulated.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure that that needs to be part of the code itself. That's why I'm saying the process should be an appendix to the code.
Yeah.
And as much as you're looking for, I'm kind of digressing a moment, so I apologize, or derailing. You're looking for volunteers to annotate changes. I'll volunteer to work on the process appendix, which includes the RACI matrix and, whether it be the process we just discussed on identifying the who for disclosure statements, with timelines. I'm volunteering for that.
Okay, great.
I mean, I think the process for getting an opinion, and I think it should be in the code of ethics, just like I think the process for deciding who has to file, I think that should be in
Yep.
code of ethics. I don't think it should be an appendix. I think it should actually be the code of ethics. The RACI matrix, I think that could be an appendix, just because like people are like visual learners.
The reason why I disagree with you on that, Brian, and it's up for discussion clearly, is the how to do something is very different than the something. I don't know how else to say it. So
Like
to
the
me,
substance
the
versus
code
the
is
procedure.
the something. How
Yeah.
you get there is a different thing.
But then like, I don't know, I guess it goes to like legislative intent. It's like, if you meant to put something in there, why didn't you? I
Oh,
think
you're such a lawyer. Oh my
I think
God.
it should be the code of ethics. I'm sorry. The RACI matrix, I think, could be an appendix, because it's like I'm a visual learner, so I think the RACI matrix is helpful because it like breaks it down simply.
But it doesn't, all right, so where I'm coming from, so we just had a whole discussion on who do you go to? So to me, there is a process map. I'm an employee. I have a question. So it starts with a box, an employee.
Yeah,
I go to the Board of Ethics. I send an email. The Board of Ethics meets, I'm doing a lot of arrows and boxes. They make a decision. The decision gets recorded and the employee's informed. You don't want that in the middle of the code.
no, I know. I'm saying not like the boxes. I'm just saying like the actual text, like within 90 days after the effective date of this chapter. Like, so that goes
Okay.
in there, but an appendix is like, oh, 90 or during December, this happens, January, that's an appendix. But I'm saying like the actual text should be in the code of ethics.
All right, I'll agree with that.
As long as it's consistent, like we don't want to conflict ourselves. But then if there's a conflict, the code of ethics, I think, prevails, not some appendix.
Well, yes and no, because if it's an appendix to the code, that's part of the entire document that's approved. So when the board approves, I'm making an assumption here, the board's going to approve all of our recommended changes. That includes this appendix. That appendix is part of the code.
But then what if there's a conflict?
Like what?
I don't know if like say, I don't know, there's a typo and the code of ethics says in January this happens and the appendix says in December this happened. I think the code prevails. Like I don't see like why legislative history would prevail over a statute. Like if,
Ugh.
oh, it's just an appendix to the statute. Like no, I think this
Provide that the appendix is part of the statute.
I don't
I
think
don't
so.
know, I get a little concerned with this, and maybe the attorneys can establish what's part of the statute, not. My feeling, just to be consistent, is it should be the law of the village, whatever it is, and then there is no doubt about it. And if the appendix is, and the attorney says that's what it is, I'm good with it. I just don't want there to be any wiggle room or doubt.
We can take an opinion, Brian, from Bob Spolzino as to whether we can.
No, I'm
invite him.
saying it's funny that we're saying village attorney now, and then we're debating about whether to obtain ethics opinions from the board of
Well,
ethics or
the
attorney.
opinion we're looking
It's
for is
funny.
whether we can make the appendix as enforceable as the code, the content of the code. I'm just throwing that out there. Okay.
I guess while we're on the topic, I could make not a binder, but like a binding of the minutes of all the meetings. Just to have them all in one spot.
Yeah.
Not that I don't think anyone would want to read 5 pages for every meeting.
You never know, Brian.
I mean, if they need something to sleep, that will do it.
Oh, come on now.
This is fascinating. Come on.
This is
Yeah.
exciting, this is exciting stuff.
It
I
is.
spent 5 years working on regulatory projects at NatWest Markets. I could tell you a whole bunch of legal and compliance folks who would love this.
Okay, well, this was very constructive. And I think the different points of view really pushed us to a nice consensus, at least the 4 of us.
Dan, can I add one thing before we move on? I know
Yeah.
you were going to draft up, some a process here, but I know that John had very strong opinions about this. What we were
Yeah.
talking about, the attorney versus the board. And so if I could ask, could we hold this off one more week and just start our next meeting just with a quick 5 minutes for John
Yeah,
to provide his input?
I'm fine with that. Brian's going to create minutes, and John will read the minutes, and that will give him the briefing he needs for next week. And as I've said before, there are a number of sections where we either are divided or we haven't been able to come up with a view, and we can make clear to the board in our report that there could be a majority view and a minority view. There could be multiple views. So we're not giving them necessarily a code that is carved in stone, but one where there are some choices that they can then choose from, and A, B, or a combination of both.
Except I would say, and I appreciate John's not here to voice his opinion and maybe change any of our minds. There are 4 of us on the call and we seem to agree.
Yeah.
So even if John and Jocelyn disagreed, it's 4 against 2. At some point, we need to move forward.
I agree, but I still want to hear their input.
Absolutely, I'm not saying no. Their input's valuable, and valid. I was combining the 2 words. But we can't keep everything open.
Agreed. We're going to cut off debate at some point. Not that anybody would oppose cutting off debate. And every member of this committee individually or in combination is free to file a minority opinion, which will absolutely go into the report. Nothing will be censored or deleted or excluded from anyone's point of view in this going to the board. So we'll hear from John, we'll hear from Jocelyn, and at some point, if we may have to agree to disagree, and John and Jocelyn or both can provide as I said, what I will colloquially refer to as a minority opinion.
Okay.
So, okay, so we have now put that one to bed for the night. It's 7:34. Can we go on? Everybody okay going on for a few more minutes?
I'm good.
Okay.
I guess.
So I'd like to go to the notes section that I sent to you. Brian, you did some research on the statute of limitations. Could you refresh us on that?
Yeah, so there was really nothing on point. Like the State Administrative Procedure Act just talks about a reasonable time frame for things like this. And then the other codes of ethics that Ellen sent us, nothing had a statute of limitations. So I think they all just like ignore the question. So there's really nothing on point. I guess it's up to us if we want to make one. I guess the best practice is just, I feel like just not to make one and just see what happens. If it's an issue raised later on, that will be solved then.
All right. What do others feel about having a statute of limitations on time to bring a complaint before the Board of Ethics? I guess that's a question to Ellen and Mike and Brian.
I mean, I guess personally, don't have one. And just if someone brings it up in the future, I guess let the courts decide or the Board of Ethics decide.
So I have an issue, and I'm gonna link this to something going on in the news right now. So if I look at all the allegations against Cuomo, and I'm trying not to take a stand, yes or no. I understand if you're working for the guy, you don't want to lose your job. I get that whole power thing. But when you listen to someone who something happened to years ago, never said a word, doesn't work for him, has nothing to lose, that's wrong. If it bothered you so much, speak up then. And so this whole statute of limitations thing to me is so murky. I don't know. I think if you want to file a complaint about someone who's no longer in that position, they've been out of that position, what's the point? Decisions have been made, they were all done, it was approved at whatever time. I don't know.
we're talking about a situation where a person, there is a perceived violation of the code of ethics, and someone seeks to bring to make a complaint, and there should be some rule of reason, I think, with respect to when you bring it. I can understand that if you're a current employee, but there should be, I think there should be some.
Right, but if you're a current employee, isn't that where the whistleblower laws start protecting you?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm an employee and I have a code of ethics concern about my manager. And I don't want to say anything now because I'm going to lose my job, blah, 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 blah. So fast forward, I quit, I have another job, life goes on, and then I file a complaint. I don't know, because there are protections in place that should have protected me to file the complaint when it was relevant.
Well,
To come back 2-3 years later, I'm not sure what the investigation can do. I don't know. I'm torn on this one.
what's a reasonable time?
And another situation is like if something just goes unnoticed for so long and then it just comes to light, like, and no one had any reason to suspect, or like a recusal or something,
Yeah,
like a
it's very
conflict
different.
of interest that no one knew anything about except that person. And like a few years later it comes to light. I don't know.
Right, but then, Brian, so let's talk about a recusal. So someone's on a land use board, they should have recused themselves, they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
A decision was made, and I'm making stuff up. Someone built a new house and, they spent $2 million on this. And 3 years later, an issue comes up. You're going to ask that homeowner to knock down their house?
No, but you're gonna ask the board member to pay a fine for not recusing themselves.
Right, but what kind of, I'm just not sure
What the
that accomplished.
ramifications are.
I think the accomplishment is that somebody is held accountable,
Yeah.
and that's the key thing. And so,
Right, but Mike, the question I have is define held accountable.
you know what? I misspoke. I don't want to say that somebody has to be held accountable, but that the matter is reviewed and the appropriate determination is had so that the residents of the village can feel as if it was looked into properly. And I don't want to prejudge it and say that something that comes before the board has to be negative, but there has to be a time frame afterwards that the
Okay,
village can
so
have a review.
I built my house for $2 million. Something comes up, 2-3 years down the road that someone on one of the boards should have recused him or herself and did not. I don't understand so the people who are complaining about my new house see that this matter is brought forward, but I don't understand what that outcome would prove.
I mean, I think there's like two separate issues, whether the how it's been built or whether the person's conduct violated the code of ethics. Like there's always the argument that, oh, only one vote wouldn't change it on the land use board. And yeah, I guess that has some merit, but the person who had a conflict still should be either fined or any other, even if it's like 2 years later, I feel like.
Right, but what's the fine, Brian? What are we talking about?
I mean, the civil fine, like the $1,500 that we're debating about.
I think the fine is separate from the review process. And before we get to discipline,
Yeah,
we've got to
true.
look at and say, do we want to have a mechanism where previous conduct can be reviewed and how far away should that extend?
Personally, I would just have no statute of limitation, just leave it an open question. But that's just my opinion. Like, I mean, no other codes of ethics has a statute that I've looked at.
So you really think no, so
Or just
I
leave it open.
file a complaint 15 years down the road?
I mean, if they have no evidence, then it's just dismissed, not because it was 15 years ago, but because it just had no evidence. I'm just saying leave an open question. Like, just don't even put it in the code of ethics.
No, I disagree, Brian. I think we've been tasked with making this, looking at the whole thing and making sure the process is sound. I don't know if I agree with you that there should be no limit. Maybe there should be a limit to the extent that sanctions could be imposed, but we could make a longer limit for the review process, right? So that people could, have a sense that, okay, the village looked into this and found the target of the matter, right? Either innocent or guilty of whatever, and that at a certain point, there'd be no further discipline.
Or I mean, I guess we'd be the first code of ethics that I've seen that has like a statute of limitation, or we could just put in a word like reasonable time.
No, I don't like that.
No, reasonable is so vague. I appreciate it's a legal term, but it has no definition.
The reality is this, and I hear what you're saying, Brian. I just don't think anything after 5 years at the furthest would have any type of serious review. Does anybody think like?
I was gonna say 3 years.
I think it
I
depends.
could live with 3 years. I think 3 years.
I mean, I think it depends on the circumstances, but
All right, so having nothing to do with the code of ethics, I'm dealing in a situation in my neighborhood where a house is being built right now in a flood zone that was previously vacant land. That's gonna cause damage to all the houses downstream. I'm one of those houses. DEC was not involved. I mean, I could go through all the flooding issues, and I'm not gonna bore all of you to death. And the village approved it. I have issues with that. If I wait 10 years to file that, shame on me.
no, I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I should be voicing my opinion right now. You're gonna cause me tens of thousands of dollars of damage. I was not consulted in advance about these plans, but I need to respond now. I don't think that statute can be forever.
But there is a statute of limitations probably for that.
I don't know, actually.
The statute of limitations covers almost every kind of action under the consolidated laws. Here we're talking about an action brought. You have someone who's sitting on the zoning board of appeals, someone sitting on one of the committees, and they have not recused. They should have recused. They were, and this may not have been discovered for a while.
No, but my situation has nothing to do with recusal. I'm just saying, in terms of me going to the village, the architectural, whoever, whichever committee, that shouldn't be open-ended.
But I think the difference is like you knew the house was being built. Like in a ethics situation, like no one would have known of the misconduct until.
I wasn't notified about the house being built. I did not receive any notification.
Or I mean,
So only when they started breaking ground, I'm like, oh my God.
yeah, like you
But
see the house being built.
Right, so I should be going now to complain.
Yeah, I agree.
I shouldn't be waiting 5 years or 3 years, which I just proposed. And so I'm not sure what this statute of limitations should be. That's right. I'm really not sure. I'm open-ended.
All right. let's move on. So we'll table that, I think, for now. I think we've talked that one out. Looking at the notes section, it's now 7:47. I can tell you that the second item on my notes relating to whether we provide a penalty for failure to timely acknowledge receipt and understanding of the code is a question that we will not resolve quickly and probably requires a fuller discussion. The third item of the agenda, am I right on this one that with respect to distributing the New York State municipal law with the Code of Ethics, Ellen, were you doing something on that?
I was on mute, sorry. So the only thing I was doing was comparing the poster to what's in our code. And I sent out an email the other day saying everything in that poster related to the Code of Ethics we have included. So I think John thought we should be adding the poster to the annual distribution. It's a duplicate as far as I'm concerned, but
Any other thoughts on that? Do we?
I thought we said we were gonna just put a link to it and state in the email that it would be, here is additional information regarding ethics that you can obtain. It was just a link.
we can, but there's no additional information.
We can just inform employees that there are ethical considerations that are also binding, that are applied, that are in the New York State General Municipal Law.
Yep.
And provide a link to that.
And that poster, it's not really a poster, but excuse me, that poster does need, by New York State law, needs to be in every public building.
Right. And I think we've added that.
Yes, we did.
Okay. Going down to number 5, regarding the, I've taken Bob Spolzino's advice and I have dropped the county attorney from the list of referrals. I also read the website, the county attorney, he's right, not that I doubted it. And he was going to send me a definition of debarment. I have not received that yet, but I have found other definitions, which I actually sent to him to get his view on that. So we will have some suggestions from other statutes, or I shouldn't say statutes. There are legal dictionaries that provide a definition of debarment. And I agree with Bob that there should be such a definition in the code. All right. I think this is probably an appropriate place to stop, unless there are any other. Oh, this can wait, but I would like your views. I sent you an example of how we can frame the proposed revised code section by section with the wording and language of the old code. So we don't have to discuss it tonight. We can discuss it in upcoming meetings, but I would like your view on how we present the revised code in as clear a fashion as possible. Any other matters that we should discuss tonight?
I don't think so.
If not, we're meeting next week at 5 o'clock. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
Second,
Second,
any discussion? All in favor, please signify.
Aye.
Nora, thank you for wrangling the meeting together, making us all co-hosts. Thank you, co-hosts,
And thanks to
And-
Augie too. We worked it out.
and Augie too.
Oh,
Thank
there's
you.
Augie.
Have a great.
Sorry for all the technical issues we had today.
oh, Augie, I didn't know you were on this whole time.
Yeah, I got in as a panelist, then as an attendee. I've had all network issues.
Thank you, Augie.
Thank you.
Once again, I'm
Very
sorry.
much. All right. Good evening, everyone. Have a safe and healthy week.
Okay.
You too. All right,
Thank-
bye.
Bye.
Right.